Welcome to episode number 23 of Nurturing Words, Voices of Experience. This is your host, Gladys Bell, and today we have a very special podcast for you, and the topic is double loss. We define double loss as a daughter whose mother quit nurturing her because of mental, physical health issues or substance abuse. And then later on, she lost her mother to death. So that would be a double loss. We have three very special guests today, Cathy DiBella, Gina Ellis, and Chris Fishel. Before they start their discussion, we're going to hear Chris Fishel share the blog she wrote about this topic called Dear Other Mother.
As my siblings and I watch the mental deterioration of our mom, we see more and more of the woman she is changing into. I call her my other mother. She is sweet and complimentary, but also timid and unsure. She's really nothing like our mom. I wrote her this letter. Dear other mother, I want to thank you for all the nice things you've done for me. Thank you for telling me I am special to you. Thank you for telling me you love me very much. Thank you for asking me for advice and help. You are a loving mother, and I'm grateful to know you. Even though we've not known each other long, I feel like I can talk to you about the ways my heart hurts. For example, and I sincerely hope it doesn't hurt your feelings to hear this, I miss my mom. Once in a while, I see a glimmer of her in your face. Like that time at the doctor's office when you disagreed with me and told me straight out. Most of the time, though, you ask for advice and listen and tell me you agree with everything I say. You seem to want to please me, to please all of us. I have a favor to ask you. If you connect with my mom during some moment when I'm not around, will you tell her something for me? Will you tell her I'm sorry? I was not an easy child. I wanted to fit in and be accepted by her, but I could never take things at face value. I think God created me as a questioner, pusher, never happy with status quo. It made my mom crazy. One of the best gifts my mom ever gave me is a book of handwritten stories about her life. I had given her that blank book with probing questions during my early 20s, and when I turned 45, she returned it, completed in her own increasingly shaky hand. As I read her history, my heart breaks for the tragedy she endured during her adolescence, the mothering she sorely needed and didn't get. I can understand her better knowing these things about her. I can understand why she wasn't the touchy-feely mom I craved, why she didn't have time to think and talk. She was a survivor, a no-nonsense doer. Those who know me best know I learned these precious skills from her. You don't need to tell her all of that. Just tell her I wish things had been easier for her. Tell her I miss her. Tell her I love her.
Double loss makes for a complicated grief process because sometimes the emotionally absent mother of a young daughter becomes a very different kind of mother later in life or just prior to her death. Today, we're hosting the author of this blog, Chris Fishel, along with Cathy DiBella and Gina Ellis in a discussion about double loss. Let's join the discussion. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We want to start our discussion today by talking about the background of how things really began, and I'd like to throw out something as a prompt. What was your relationship with your mother like as you were growing up? Who'd like to start out with that question? Okay, Cathy.
My relationship with my mother, I thought was good when I was little, and I didn't really learn that it wasn't good until much later in life. But there was emotional abuse that started at 5 years old. And at the time, it scared me because my mom and dad ganged up on me. And I didn't really know what to think about it and didn't know what it was at the time, but that's when it started for me. And my mom didn't stop nurturing me I don't think she ever started. I don't think I ever got the nurturing that I should have gotten.
And that's interesting because as a young child, we assume that we will have the love and nurturing of a mother. And so that doesn't always come out. It doesn't always get noticed until later on. But looking back, you can see lots of other things. Anybody else want to respond to that? Gina.
Hello. I had a little different experience, similar in that I didn't know until much later, but throughout my childhood, I felt like I was loved and nurtured and encouraged, but then I would be confused. And again, that word was given to me through therapy much later in life. But I was confused by incongruency between the way that I was being treated and cared for and intentions and words versus the actions. Sometimes they matched up, but oftentimes they did not. I consider my first loss due to emotional absence, possibly narcissism. And so lots of times, while my mother had a lot of really good intentions to be nurturing and caring and loving, her own emotional status was sometimes in the way of that nurturing that I feel like she really was trying to achieve at the time.
You know, as in infancy and toddlerhood, I would imagine that whatever we experienced, we would incorporate as normal until we found out later on that it may not have been normal. But it's interesting to hear different stories from very, very early ages. Chris.
I think my story might be similar to Gina's or have some things in common. I grew up in a home where everything seemed to be great. All the pictures looked great, but there was something unspoken going on. It just felt like things were wrong. I had 3 siblings, and in our home, it was the kind of home where children were meant to be seen but not heard. We weren't supposed to make a mess. And if, we had to clean that up right away, if we even made one. There wasn't a lot of physical affection, hugging and kissing, and that we didn't do. And I just grew up with this feeling that I was unlovable, I guess. There was always this absence, something that I just craved to be loved and never felt like I could get that. And so I think it was something that was kind of vague. I mean, there were moments, things that happened when I would try to be who I was. I was a big questioner. I'd ask questions. I wanted to understand things. And I was always told, this is just the way it is. Don't ask questions. So I felt like I wasn't the child that my parents desired because I was just too much. Asked too many questions, made too much noise, was too loud. It just didn't go along with the rules that were not written down, but we were supposed to follow.
You know, that's kind of a great segue into the next area that we were going to talk about. But was there anything else regarding early relationships that anyone wanted to mention? Cathy?
I can relate to Gina with her confusion because my parents on one side seemed loving, but the minute I did something they didn't like or didn't fit their form, then I get yelled at, even though it wasn't always my fault. So I always felt like I had to fit a form, and if I didn't, I got in trouble.
And you know, all of the comments that you've made really bring out the fact that as children, that can be very confusing when you're trying to get the love and nurturing that you need and you're looking for a response. Let's go on to this second area. And I think what you said is a great segue. The next question would be, when and how did you realize or understand that you had mother loss? Gina.
The first time I would have recognized having mother loss was as a young adult. I got married rather young at the age of 18. And about 2 years into my marriage, my mother came over to where we were living, and there was a situation that occurred that was physical. And after that confrontation, she refused to apologize or communicate with me for several months and demanded an apology for me, for which I had not done anything I felt that I need to apologize for other than speak my position, but I had not participated in any of the of the physical altercation. And so that was the first time I felt the sting of mother loss.
How old were you at that point?
I was 20. And that was the first time I ever entered therapy after recognizing I was suffering from some physical ailments that was happening to me that I was putting myself through from the stress and anxiety of the situation. I got some help, and that was the first time I realized I needed to separate further from my mother if that was going to be my choice, was to continue in my marriage, that I needed a little help to walk through what that separation looked like. And then, so that was the first time. And then, as you can imagine, over the years, as you continue to separate and grow and mature, there were other times that we would not be in communication. And it was not until after her death that I had come in contact with Motherless Daughters Ministry, and through an interview with the founder, Mary Ellen, realized what mother loss that wasn't by death really meant. And she asked some very poignant questions to have me even start to understand what that would mean for me.
So there could be a number of years before you even recognized the fact that you were experiencing mother loss then. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to share my experience. When I was 12, I was molested by a family member, and I immediately told my mom. And I remember this just as clearly now as the night that it happened. I woke her up, and she and I said, "I need to talk to you." And we sat in the living room on the couch, and she told me it was a very serious thing that I was accusing the person of. And she asked me if I thought maybe it was just my imagination. And I was so insecure about, I remember imagining this other person and me in a courtroom, and that it would be, him against me. And it scared me. I didn't want to be put in that kind of a position. And so I said, yeah, I guess it was just my imagination. It was probably about an hour conversation. And that other person joined in. She went and got him, and he joined in as well for a while. And I remember the next morning getting on the school bus and thinking, things are different now. So it was at that point, I didn't really understand it as mother loss, but I knew on some level that I've got to look out for myself. I couldn't rely on a mother. And many years later, when my husband and I got married and we adopted 4 children, as soon as the babies came into our home and we became a family, I really realized it very clearly. That's when it became very painful for me to recognize that. I mean, when I experienced everything that my mom would, any young mother would: sleepless nights, a messy house, not having a chance to take a shower, no privacy. And I could imagine her in those situations, but I was choosing differently. I was choosing to not yell at my kid if they couldn't sleep, but to find out what's wrong. Did you have a nightmare? Are you okay? Do you need me? That kind of thing. And that was when I really recognized that I had mother loss, because I found that I was a different kind of mom than I had experienced.
That experience was definitely a turning point, but it also made you a better mother. You turned that situation into something positive. Cathy?
I knew growing up that my parents left me empty. I had a counselor that said once, "I can almost hear your words echoing in an empty hall, like you sound so empty." I knew I couldn't relate to them on an emotional level. That always made me feel so lost. My mother guilted me for wanting to leave her and be independent. I hated going to their house for anything. And once I got into therapy at 44 and I related my first experience, and my therapist said, "That's just downright abuse," I was shocked. I'm like, "Why? I'm not abused. I grew up in a great home." But I was surprised that she called it abuse. So that was at 44.
So there can be a lot of years between the experiences and the recognition of what really happened. When we defined double loss, we talked about an initial lack of nurturing, and then you lost your mother to death. All 3 of you have lost your moms now. Can you give us some information about when and how your mother died?
I lost my mom, it'll be 3 years this month. She suffered, that I knew of, for about 3 years with Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease.
Okay.
My mom died
All
in
right.
1999 of colon cancer.
Gina?
My mom, about 7 years ago, she went into the hospital with some type of blood disease. We never really found out what happened. And she was in there for several weeks. And then she was in a nursing home for a little over a year before she did pass away due to some the official term, I guess, was complications of COPD. But I think there was something more serious that went on the year before that really is what brought her down. And the thing that's interesting during that experience, and for that year, she was not able to speak hardly at all during that whole entire year. And so that was a different experience to go through.
When we describe double loss, many times, if there are siblings involved, you or one of your siblings had to nurture the other siblings in the family because your mother wasn't providing that. And so it causes you to kind of grow up fast. But then your mother passed away, and that is what we consider the second loss. Let's go next to a question about what healing have you experienced before, during, and or after this loss? Cathy?
All of my healing took place after my mother died. I was very tired of being angry. I was so angry all the time. So actually, I sought help to have more emotional stability in my life, more spiritual stability in my life, and quit being angry. And that was 4 or 5 years after my mom died.
Gina?
I want to add an extra layer of healing to your question, Gladys, for me.
Okay.
During probably about 5 years before my mom went into the nursing home, I went through some therapy for some things going on in my life. Started with work, kind of with marriage and things like that. But it really ended up being a lot of the root issues was healing that I needed to have from experiences, which at the time, again, I didn't understand that there was mother loss due in there, but my therapist was very helpful in helping to mirror back nurturing as part of the process. And so there was a lot of healing that I did for myself personally during that time. But then, so I kind of understood the dynamic of what had been this confusion in my life before at that point. But then the healing, I feel like after she passed away and I found Motherless Daughters Ministry, there was 2 different levels of healing that I wanted to share about the mother loss. And one was that during the journey, which is a retreat or a longer 12-week program that Motherless Daughters Ministry has, I had kind of a supernatural experience. Chris earlier talked about how when she became a mom and she decided to choose differently, I really resonate with that because my entire life, that was how I was processing the confusion, was a comparison of, well, this is kind of what I'm seeing, and trying to separate myself from who mom was and who I was and what was my reality. I was constantly doing this comparison. It became second nature, a thought spiral that I did on a daily basis. And through the journey, he and I had a conversation and it was supernaturally released from me. And that was just a beautiful miracle for me. But I didn't know exactly what to do with it after that. That left a lot of empty space in my brain that had been taken up by that. And so I'm just really grateful for that. But then as far as her death, she had passed away by that time, but was still obviously very alive in that thought process. And then recently, so 5 years after she had died, I recently had a moment where from the moment she died, I was relieved because that was not the life that she wanted to live in the nursing home. I knew that. And so I was relieved for her sake that she was no longer in her body experiencing all that. And so relieved that I really felt like I was over processing grief because I had grieved her and my relationship so many times through my life. And so I had decided, well, I'm done with grieving. And then 5 years later, I also just didn't want to wax poetic about someone who had passed away and forget that things were not always perfect. And so I wanted to keep a balanced aspect, and I never allowed myself the healing that I've recently, and we all, if you don't know, if you haven't truly experienced it, grief is a journey.
Yes, it is.
Not a destination. And so in my journey of grief, I got to this moment recently that I was able, with my full heart and full spirit, to say something that was just a beautiful sentiment about my mom and mean it with 100% of my fiber. It didn't discount any of the other things, but it was such a special moment of healing in my grief journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what you've brought out, Gina, illustrates the layers, and I think you used that term earlier, the layers of discovery that you have in this process in double loss, because you don't realize that early on that it is mother loss when you discover that. And then there are layers of discovery as you live your life. Very interesting.
Absolutely.
Cathy?
I'd like to give a perspective for someone that doesn't have children. I chose not to have kids, so I didn't get that with children like Gina and Chris are talking about. But I was a very fearful child because my parents never explained anything to me. I didn't like my mom. I didn't like her life. She sat and watched soaps all day, every day. She would go to church, but basically her life was my dad, her kids. She lived her life through her kids and didn't have a life of her own. I didn't want that. So Gina was talking about comparisons, and my comparison is, well, I just did this, and my mom would never have done that. She would have been too afraid. She wouldn't have had the motivation to do it. So now when I do something I know she wouldn't do, I feel very powerful. I also had visions through my therapy that God gave me about unconditional love, what it looks like. Visions of leaving my parents' home and being independent and how that was okay. Even though my mom made me feel guilty for having my own life and cried and was depressed. And so I didn't get very many good modeling of how it was supposed to look. So I've had to learn all this on my own. And as I do it and as I do new things, I feel more powerful. And that's what keeps me going. And to be able to help other women to be able to feel that way.
Truly, this comes out, as Gina said, a journey.
Absolutely. Every day.
Chris?
Yeah, I started to have some healing take place about a year before I realized my mother was sick. She didn't know she was sick, but I knew, I could tell something was off. But about a year before that, I was really struggling with my mom. I stayed in contact, but I learned to have more of a surface level relationship with my mom. And so, I would see her 3-4 times a year. I purposely moved several hours away so that I could have my own support system, my own life, and not have to worry about pleasing her, because I knew that when she was disappointed, she would let me know. And disappointment was anything that was not what she was expecting or had planned for me, which was a similar life to what she had. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to deal with all the emotions around that. I just didn't want to be weighted down with that. And so I moved several hours away. But about a year before, I had at that point 4 children. One of my children has mental illness of some type that causes a lot of erratic behaviors, and just the sweetest kid ever. But, not your quiet, sit and read a book kind of child, which none of mine are, thank goodness. But my mom made me so angry, and my dad as well, because they were so unaccepting of my children. And they would say things like, he doesn't have to act that way, hurtful things. And I wanted very clearly to protect my children from hearing anything like that, because I didn't want them to have to grow up with the kinds of feelings that I had when I was growing up. And so I was very angry, and I just love how God gets us when it's the right time. I was so angry, and this phrase kept coming to my mind, and I thought it might be a song lyric. I wasn't sure. I looked it up on my phone on Google, and And it was a line from Matthew West's song, Forgiveness. And as soon as it said forgiveness, I was like, oh, I know what he's trying to tell me. And then, but I kind of pushed it out of my mind. And then that Sunday in church, people, there was a call if anyone would like prayer for any reason to come up to the altar. And I would normally not do something like that, but I went up there after. I just thought I have got to not be angry at my mom anymore. And I asked that elder to pray for me to not be angry with my mom. And he asked me a question, how long have you been angry with your mom? And as I calculated it out, I answered 35 years. And that just was so overwhelming, still overwhelming. I mean, 35 years. I didn't feel like I was 35 years old, at the time. I
Right.
still feel like I'm less than 35, but it was such a long time. And it made me realize this has consumed my whole life. And it's going to have to be a choice that I make to let it go. And I just was there. And I don't know how it happened, but I know that was the start. And within several months, it didn't bother me quite as much anymore. I knew I was my children's mom. And I didn't have to get my mom to understand them the way that I do. I just have to make sure that they only get the feelings from me of how loved and lovable they are. So it was a really huge step in the healing process. And then when she became ill, my sister and I helped take care of her, and her personality changed. And I'll tell you what, it was the most beautiful gift that God could ever give me. My mom said things to me. I don't think she even knew who I was some of those times, but she would tell me I was a good mom. I mean, she told me everything I always wanted to hear, that she was proud of me, that she loved me. And it wasn't like she just recited these things. It would come organically out of what was happening. She would see me with my kids and she would say, "You're a good mom to those kids." I wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, that was my mom. That's how I wouldn't be able to do it, but you're a really good mom. And so her changing personality, I was so blessed by that, because I know not everybody has that kind of experience, but it caused a lot of healing for me. And at the time, I didn't need it from her anymore, but I really felt it. I really did feel it and was grateful for it. I knew that that was God giving me a gift.
And that truly was a gift. Cathy?
I just wanted to say about forgiveness, that forgiveness is also a journey, just like our healing.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yes.
get triggered 10 times a day on a memory or something that makes us mad again. And we have to forgive again. It's not something that I forgive you and it's over. There are good days and bad days, and we just have to keep forgiving.
There are a couple of things that several of you have mentioned make me look at all three of you as survivors. Your stories are a testament to truly the journey that this life is when you've had this experience of double loss. And also, one of the things that came out and what I heard from you is that boundaries are important to your survivor.
Definitely.
Yes.
As a survivor, you had to set boundaries, and each of your stories is a testament to the power of the determination to make your life positive out of what you were dealt, out of what you were given. There's one other area we wanted to talk about before we wind up this podcast. For our listeners, what have you learned that you'd like to offer as advice or support to other women who experience double loss? Cathy?
One thing is, a lot of times after our moms die, we're still trying to get their approval. Mm-hmm. And we need to get rid of that. Most of us who try to get approval, even if she lived, would never get it. It's not going to happen if your mom is emotionally absent. My mom was emotionally absent with narcissistic tendencies, so you're not going to get that approval. You need to know that I'm okay, just the way I am. I am enough, and you don't need her approval. It's your life. Go on and live your life the way you want to, because you're an adult now and you can do whatever you want.
Chris?
I think the most impactful thing that I did was learning my mother's own story. And it wasn't easy to get the information. as I was growing up, I asked a lot of questions about my mom's life, about her family, those that had passed away. And she rarely gave me much information at all, just very short answers. But I never stopped wanting to know that. And when I was in college, I gave her a gift of one of those book of questions about your mother's story, for her to fill in the information. And we had a strained relationship. And I had forgotten that I gave that to her until my 44th birthday. She
Wow.
gave it to me as a birthday gift, all completed. And it would just happen to be, and this is how God works, it happened to be a time when I was working through forgiveness that I was telling you about earlier. And as part of that, as part of my trying to understand her as a woman, not just as a mom, I plotted on a line all of her life experiences that I knew about from this book she'd given me, plus the questions I had asked her before. And I could see that, first of all, that she was also abused as a young girl. And I could see a bunch of traumatic events that she experienced all between the ages of like 12 and 14. She lost her
Wow.
father, she lost her brother, and they were very poor. It was just very, very traumatic at a really important age. And then when she turned 18, her mother got remarried and moved away, and she and her sister were sort of left to fend for themselves. And so what I learned was that she was a motherless daughter, and it had
Right.
never even crossed my mind before. So I could see that she didn't get the nurturing she needed, and that's why she wasn't able to help me with the things that I needed, because she had never worked through those on her own, herself in her own life. And I don't think the resources were there like they are now. So it made
Yeah.
me see her as a woman, not just, and as a girl growing up, what her life had been like. And it made me so grateful for the resources that are available to me now that she didn't have, to be able to work through some of these things. And actually, as she became ill, her mother was still alive. And
Oh,
I
okay.
and I was able to even give her some advice about dealing with difficult things with her mom. So it just turned out to be a key piece of healing for me. And I would encourage women who have had difficult relationships with their mother to not give up on trying to understand, or
Mhm.
at least to see their mother as a broken person as well.
Yes.
Because a lot of times I'm seeing that this is generational. It's passed down from
Mhm.
one mother-daughter to the next.
You
And
know, one of the very important things that you mentioned was learning your mother's story. And so many times we don't have that opportunity. What a gift that book was.
it really was. I never expected it. I never thought I would get that. And it turned out to be a key piece of healing for me.
That's such an important part of your story. And I think, too, that it's real important the advice that you gave not to give up. It's never too late.
One of the things that surprised me is that when I was younger, there was my mom, and then there was this mom of my imagination, the mom that I desired.
Hmm.
And then when my mom got ill, she became a different kind of mom. She wasn't mothering, she was very needy at that time. So I was more mothering her, but there was like this third kind of mom. And what surprised me is that after my mom died, I missed I missed the mom that I took care of because she was so sweet to me. But most of all, I miss that mom that I wanted, that I desired, that I never had.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. Like I don't miss the. Terrible to say, but I don't think I don't really miss the mom that was the mom I had most of my life, who didn't approve of me or accept me or want to hear what my thoughts were. And she wasn't that way all the time, but enough of the time that I just felt like I was never okay. What I really miss is the loss of that mom who I never had and never will have now. There's not going to ever be a chance to have that mom.
And I've heard many people mention that you grieve over what you didn't get, what you didn't have, and that you see with other women and their mothers or other children and their mothers. Gina?
Absolutely. Yes, Gladys, You hit the nail on the head there. For me, some of that grieving and missing what you didn't get or whatever was part of the journey of my life, even if I didn't understand what it was. For me, I was aware that there were certain things I was just not going to get, because very much the world revolved around my mother, and exactly whatever it was her reality, and her perspective is what ruled, no matter who the audience was. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the advice or support I would give others, there was a time before my mom died. I'm trying to remember when it was, but that doesn't matter so much as this bit of advice. If you are able to, with your siblings, have a conversation. Before I even had the words to call it mother loss or whatever have you, there was a time my siblings and I got together and we spent one night away where we were dealing with other things happening with family members and family loss and some confusion happening with my mother's health. We just kind of had conversations about what it was like growing up. I'm the oldest and we're each 2 years apart from each other. And so the mom that I was experiencing when I was 20, well, that was the mom that my brother was experiencing at 16. And the mom that I had at 16 was very different than the mom he had at 16. And just like, we're all different. Not that I'm saying we were turning into a bashing experience, but it was more of a healing experience, just starting to understand each other. And even for me, since we weren't talking about mom's state of health per se, we were talking about our experiences. And it was just healing to hear them express different things that they had experienced, as well as just my own story. And I want to reiterate kind of what Cathy said. I agree 1000% that forgiveness is a journey. It continues to happen even now. Like you said, I think it was Gladys, like you just have to keep, every time something new comes up in the healing journey from the grief even. And so I think the last point I would say is talk about it, not just with your siblings, not with God and forgiveness, but with other women about your loss, because there's so many things. There's coworkers perhaps, or neighbors or other family members, that just grief and loss in general is uncomfortable and we don't talk about it enough. And yet when we do, it can be just so healing and become another step in our journey. And I am grateful for Motherless Daughters Ministry and how they help fill in those pieces for us.
Cathy?
Talking about grief, I did not grieve for my mother. She was sick for like a year and a half. And then they gave her so much medicine that she says, what happened to me? There's this black hole. I don't even remember. So she was kind of out of it. And then she was in hospice for 3 weeks before she died in a stage 4 coma. But she didn't share herself with me. So I felt like I didn't know her. I have no idea how she felt when her father died at 14. I don't know any family stories. She didn't have a voice. She couldn't stand up for herself. She just didn't have a life. She just existed from one day to the next. And if I were to talk to my siblings, my oldest sister, who she hurt the most, thought they were perfect parents. My siblings and I are very far apart. My oldest sister was 12 years older and my next sister was 9 years older. So I was pretty much raised alone. But there was such a difference that the sister next to me, she knew there was a problem and she was in therapy for many years. Unfortunately, she was the kind of person that got knowledge but really didn't. It just made her worse. I don't know how to explain that, but she thinks she kind of became a know-it-all. And it's only because of my mom, because my mom was very prideful. And, I don't blame anything on my sisters. It was our atmosphere of just existing from day to day. So I really couldn't get together with my siblings. And now my oldest sister has died and the sister next to me were totally estranged. And I really don't see anybody in my family at all. So sometimes you do have to talk to other people because your family's not there, or they're saying you're crazy. That's not the way I see it, because they won't deal with the hurt that my parents caused them. They don't want to deal with it. So you will find people in the Motherless Daughter Ministry that you can relate to and will not say you're crazy. We are here.
we have been blessed today with these three women on our podcast. And I have to say that all three of these women comprise a gold mine of experience. And all three of these women are also volunteers for the Motherless Daughters Ministry. They are all three blog writers. And I have to say survivors and champions, because you have turned your mess into a message, and out of your test has come a testimony to what is possible. We all are on a journey. And I think Gina brought that out, that this truly is a journey. Forgiveness, as Cathy brought out, is a journey. And all of your stumbling blocks, you have created stepping stones into your future. And thank you for sharing your experiences today with our listening audience. And we hope that you have been blessed by listening to the podcast today. And we just want to say thank you to all three of you, Chris Fishel, Cathy DiBella, and Gina Ellis.
Thank you, Gladys.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you for listening to Nurturing Words, Voices of Experience, a podcast by the Motherless Daughters Ministry.